The night sky over Chicago was supposed to be quiet. It was late October 1942, and the city buzzed in that uneasy blend of patriotism and grief that had swept across America since Pearl Harbor. People prayed harder, boys enlisted younger, and mothers learned to live with the echo of silence at dinner tables where their sons had once laughed. At the edge of Midway Field, where civilian training flights still operated under wartime restrictions, 18-year-old Alice Bennett gripped the cold metal railing, staring up at a sky she believed owed her a destiny. She had been obsessed with airplanes long before America entered the war. While girls her age listened to swing records and practiced lipstick shades named Victory Red, Alice collected aviation manuals from scrap bins behind libraries, memorizing every diagram until she could trace engines and wing structures from memory. She wasn't born a prodigy, she became one out of pure hunger, the kind only war can sharpen. That night wasn't just about flying, it was about proving she deserved to be in the air at all. Her older brother, Thomas, had died in the attack on Pearl Harbor. His bomber never made it off the runway. The telegram arrived on Christmas morning. The tree lights were still blinking when their mother collapsed, and their father punched a hole in the kitchen door so hard his knuckles bled. Alice didn't cry that day. She looked at her brother's folded uniform on the dining table and whispered, "If they took you from the sky, I'll take the sky back." But women weren't allowed in active combat missions, not officially, not publicly, not where it mattered. The government created a new program, the WASP, Women Air Force Service Pilots, but even that was seen as support work, ferrying aircraft, testing planes, freeing male pilots for combat. No medals, no recognition, no promise of respect. Still, Alice applied, not because she thought they would welcome her, but because the war wouldn't wait for permission. Her application was rejected the first time. Too young, no formal hours logged, no certification. So she got certified. She forged flight time, not out of dishonesty, but survival. She struck deals with local mechanics. She flew borrowed trainers at night in abandoned fields with no radio, no lights, just the moon and the risk of crashing into trees if she miscalculated her approach. She climbed into cockpits that smelled like gasoline and dust, wearing trousers she cut from her father's old Navy uniforms. By the time she applied again, she had logged enough hours to rival men twice her age. The rejection letter never arrived. Instead, she got a phone call at dawn. Report to Avenger Field, Sweetwater, Texas. Bring only essentials. Training begins immediately. She didn't tell her parents. She left a note on the kitchen counter next to a cold cup of coffee. "If I don't fly now, I'll never forgive myself." Now, standing at Midway Field waiting for the transport aircraft that would take her to Texas, she felt her heartbeat sink with the hum of engines across the runway. The wind whipped her hair across her eyes, but she didn't blink. A sudden roar split the night, an emergency landing. A training aircraft, wheels locked, trailing smoke, metal scraping the runway in a shower of sparks. People froze. Mechanics sprinted. Someone screamed, "Get back!" Alice didn't think. She ran toward the plane. The cockpit canopy jammed, pilot unconscious inside. Fuel leaking, flames licking the tail. Ground crew yelling for her to stop. She climbed onto the wing, ignoring the heat burning through her boots, and slammed her elbow into the release lever until blood dripped down her wrist. The canopy popped. She dragged the pilot out just moments behind her. The fuselage exploded behind her, the blast sending debris across the airfield like shrapnel. Reporters arrived within minutes. One headline hit national papers the next morning. "Chicago Girl Saves Pilot, a future hero in the making?" But no one knew this night wasn't her story beginning. It was simply the moment the world finally noticed. The train to Sweetwater rattled through the dawn like a metallic heartbeat echoing across the country. Alice sat by the window, chin resting on her palm, eyes fixed on passing farms, oil fields, and ghost town stations that looked abandoned by the war itself. The newspaper article about the rescue lay folded in her coat pocket, but she hadn't reread it. That moment didn't feel like an accomplishment. It felt like a warning. The sky had already begun testing her before she'd even earned wings. Every time the train hissed to a stop, new women boarded. They carried suitcases, flight goggles, leather jackets, rolled up letters from parents begging them to stay home, and bravery stitched into silence. Some wore dresses, others overalls. Most looked nervous, all looked determined. These weren't girls running from their lives. They were women running towards something the country still didn't believe they could do. A tall brunette with sharp cheekbones and a Tennessee drawl slid into the seat beside her. "You Bennett, the Chicago girl?" Alice didn't look up immediately. Word travels that fast? "Anything involving explosions travels fast these days," the girl said with a grin. "I'm Nora Hayes, used to barnstorm county fairs. Nearly crashed into a Ferris wheel once. Figure that qualifies me for war." Alice finally smiled, tension loosening from her jaw. Across the aisle, another girl polished her flight boots like they were relics. A red-haired woman recited aircraft checklists under her breath, hands shaking. One carried a pocket Bible, whispering prayers between stations. These women weren't there to be patriotic symbols. They were there because they needed the sky more than safety. When the conductor shouted, "Sweetwater, last stop!" a hush fell over the carriage. No one moved at first. Then, as if sharing a silent oath, they all stood. Avenger Field wasn't glamorous. Gust storms rolled across the ground like low-flying clouds. Wooden barracks lined the perimeter. Rows of planes sat under the sun. AT-6 Texans, BT-13 Valiants, PT-19 trainers, each one looking like it had already lived a lifetime. Engines coughed more than they roared. Paint faded under Texas heat. Mechanics worked with oil-streaked hands and no patience for mistakes. Their commanding officer, a rigid man with silver hair and a stare sharp enough to slice aluminum, addressed the group. "You are not here because the nation needs heroes. You are here because the nation needs pilots. Do not confuse the two." His voice carried the weight of thousands of lost men. "You'll fly the same aircraft men fly. You'll train under the same standards. If you crash, you burn the same way. You receive no military status, no benefits, no burial honors. When you graduate, you will not be celebrated. You will be invisible." Silence. Alice's pulse hammered, not from fear, but from purpose. Training began immediately. They weren't treated like recruits. They were treated like replacements. Wake at 0500. Marching drills, flight lectures in sweltering classrooms, engine maintenance with grease clogging every pore, navigation charts so complex they looked like riddles written by the sky itself. And then, the air. The first time Alice stepped into an AT-6, she felt like her lungs expanded twice their size. The aircraft hummed beneath her fingertips, impatient, alive. The instructor climbed in behind her. "You screw up once and the ground gets you," he warned through the headset. She didn't screw up. She flew tight patterns, clean climbs, dives that sliced through wind so sharp her eyes watered. When the instructor finally spoke again, his tone had changed. "You fly like you've already lost something." Alice didn't answer. She banked right, feeling the world tilt beneath her. Not everyone soared. A girl from Boston clipped a wingtip during landing practice, cartwheeling across dirt until medics carried her away on a stretcher. Another froze mid-air when her engine sputtered, unable to restart it before emergency crews pulled her from wreckage. Not all returned to barracks at night. Their empty bunks sat like ghosts. One evening, while polishing a propeller, Nora leaned in close. "We're proving ourselves to men who already think we don't belong," she whispered. "Imagine what happens when we start proving ourselves to the sky." Alice didn't respond with words. She simply stared out across the runway at a distant bomber preparing for departure. The engines roared, sending vibrations through the ground into her bones. She wasn't here to ferry planes. She wasn't here to support the war. She was here to rewrite who was allowed to touch the sky. And somewhere beyond Texas heat and training drills, a mission waited. One that would turn her from a promising pilot into a legend whispered in war rooms long after peace returned. She just didn't know it yet. The wind at Avenger Field cut colder at night, slicing across the open runways like a warning. By the time Alice reached her third month of training, the base no longer felt like a proving ground. It felt like a battlefield disguised with classrooms and practice flights. Every day ended with bodies exhausted, fingers blistered, eyes red from staring into engine fumes and horizon lines. The girls who thought flying was romantic had already quit. The ones still standing were carved into steel. One night, after a brutal day of formation drills and emergency landings, Alice sat alone behind Hangar 3, legs stretched out on warm concrete. She traced her brother's dog tags between her fingers, the metal cold even under Texas heat. She never told anyone she carried them. It felt like a private vow, not a story. Nora found her there, dropping a canteen beside her boots. "You didn't eat dinner," she said, sitting down without invitation. "You keep training like this, you're going to outfly half of Texas and die doing it." Alice let out a low laugh. "Maybe flying harder is how I stay alive." "Or how you burn out," Nora replied. Her voice softened. "Look, I get it. We all lost someone. But if you push until you break, your brother doesn't get honored. He gets repeated." Alice stayed quiet. The sky above them pulsed with stars, planes lined like silhouettes against moonlight. The war felt close even from thousands of miles away. The whistle blew in the distance. Curfew. They stood up, but before heading to barracks, Nora placed a hand on Alice's sleeve. "Just promise me you'll fly to win, not to bleed." Alice nodded, a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Training escalated. No more basic drills. Now they flew cross-country solo missions, navigating with nothing but a compass, crude maps, and instinct. Mechanics stripped engines during flight tests to simulate failures. One morning, instructors intentionally ruptured oil lines mid-air to test emergency return skills. That afternoon, Alice landed her aircraft with smoke trailing behind her like a comet. "That girl's got fire," someone said near the toolbox racks. But fire could consume as easily as it could illuminate. One afternoon, an announcement ripped through the base like a gunshot. "All cadets to runway 6, emergency crash response." Alice sprinted across the field with others. Smoke billowed at the far end of the runway, black and thick. A training plane lay twisted in the dirt, its nose buried, propeller torn clean off. Medics swarmed, mechanics yelled. The heat was so intense they couldn't get close. Alice grabbed a fire coat without thinking, sprinting closer until someone yanked her back. "Not this time," a mechanic barked. "Fuel tanks ready to blow." She froze in horror. The pilot trapped inside was a girl she'd flown beside just yesterday, Marjorie Tyler, quiet, soft-spoken, terrified of thunderstorms but fearless in the cockpit. She had confessed days earlier that she joined the program because her fiancé shipped out and she wanted to meet him in the sky. The explosion came before help arrived. A shockwave rolled across the field. The screams didn't stop when the flames faded. That night, her bunk was stripped, mattress removed, name tag thrown into a storage bin. They weren't given a memorial. That was the rule. Alice stared at the empty bunk until lights out, jaw tight, heart colder. During inspection the next day, instructors stood rigid and silent. Finally, the commanding officer spoke. "This is war. If you are here to be safe, go home. If you are here to serve, then understand sacrifice is part of the uniform, whether or not they issue you one." No one moved. After dismissal, Alice walked to the runway alone. The scorch marks were still there, dark streaks against dirt and concrete. She knelt, pressed her fingers into the ash-stained soil, and whispered, "I won't let any of this be forgotten." That night, she didn't train harder. She trained sharper. Less rage, more precision. Flying not to escape pain, but to become someone who could prevent it. The next week, instructors posted a classified notice. Special assignment trials, limited selection, advanced performance only. Whispers spread. Rumors danced. Nora elbowed her while they stood in line for roll call. "I know that look," she murmured. "You're already planning to qualify." Alice's eyes stayed fixed ahead. "I'm not planning," she said quietly. "I'm preparing." She didn't know what the assignment was, but she felt the shift in her bones. The war was about to move closer, and so was her destiny. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee, engine grease, and anticipation. Only 12 girls stood inside, the best performers from months of training. Their boots were muddy, jackets worn from sun and wind, faces changed by exhaustion and purpose. Alice stood among them, arms crossed, trying not to show how hard her heart was beating. Whatever this assignment was, it wasn't routine. The commanding officer entered without ceremony, a stack of folders under his arm. He didn't speak at first, just scanned their faces like he was selecting instruments for a mission that could not afford a single wrong note. When his eyes landed on Alice, there was no acknowledgement, just a silent calculation, as though he was deciding whether she was a pilot or a liability. He dropped the folders onto the table. "Ladies, you are no longer just trainees," he said. "You are candidates for long-range ferry missions, frontline delivery." The room shifted, silent, heavy. These were the missions no one talked about publicly. Women flying brand new aircraft, sometimes bombers, across the country to bases preparing to deploy them into combat zones. Not battle, but close enough to feel like the war's heartbeat. High risk, zero recognition. He continued, "Your job will be to deliver aircraft faster than factories can build them. Weather, engine malfunctions, sabotage, fuel shortages, hostile airspace, expect all of it. If you go down, there will be no military funeral, no flag-draped casket, no medals. We cannot admit you existed." The words hit harder than gunfire. One girl raised her hand, voice trembling. "Why us, sir? Why women?" He stared at her. "Because every man is needed at the front. This nation doesn't have enough pilots left to deliver planes. You are not here by charity. You are here by necessity." Alice felt something ignite in her, anger, pride, hunger. She wasn't being allowed in. She was being needed. After the briefing, they were sent to the hangars for aircraft familiarization. Up close, the war looked different. Rows of fighters gleamed like predatory birds. P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, B-25 Mitchell bombers with open hatches and gun mounts stripped for weight. Some were still covered in factory paper. Others had bullet dents from test runs overseas. Alice placed her hand on the fuselage of a Mustang. The metal was warm from sunlight, humming faintly like it remembered every sky it had carved through. "This one's trouble," a mechanic warned, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's fast but temperamental, stalls if you breathe wrong." Alice smiled faintly. "Sounds like me." The mechanic paused, then nodded with reluctant respect. Training shifted into brutality. Not emotional hardship, technical war. They flew back-to-back cross-state missions with no rest, learned to read weather patterns like scripture, memorized emergency gear layouts blindfolded. They practiced flying with one engine dead, fuel leaking, or radios jammed. They learned to land on dirt, on grass, on runways so short the wheels screamed against steel. Many cracked under pressure. One girl faked stomach illness to skip night flights. Another broke down sobbing when ordered to fly through a storm cell that looked like a black wall across the sky. Two simply packed their bags in silence and left after lights out. Alice stayed. Not because she felt brave, but because the alternative was going home and pretending she hadn't tasted the sky with purpose. One night, while working on navigation charts, Nora leaned over the table, voice low. "I heard a rumor," she whispered. "Some of these ferry runs are going farther than bases in the south. Word is a few might head toward the coast, maybe even across the Atlantic." Alice paused mid-stroke of her pencil. "That's not possible," she murmured, though she desperately wanted it to be. Nora shrugged. "In war, impossible just means someone hasn't died trying yet." The lights flickered, generator humming through the quiet. Alice stared down at the map, tracing from Texas to the East Coast, then beyond. Open water, Europe burning, the sky between becoming a graveyard. If she made it across, she wouldn't just be flying to deliver planes. She'd be flying to the war itself. She folded the map slowly, pulse steady now, not frantic. When she walked back to the runway, the wind carried the distant rumble of departing bombers. The world was shifting. Lines were blurring. History was stretching to make room for what women weren't supposed to do. Alice didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. She didn't yet know the mission that would make her a legend was already being planned, and her name was scribbled at the top of the classified file. The morning Alice was assigned her first official ferry mission, the air smelled like wet metal and storm clouds. She stood in line on the runway with 9 other girls while officers handed out sealed envelopes, flight orders, weather charts, engine notes, and radio frequencies. The envelopes were thick, stamped with red ink, restricted. The kind of orders you weren't allowed to talk about, even in dreams. When Alice received hers, the officer didn't smile. He just looked her up and down like measuring whether she'd break under weight she hadn't carried yet. "Northbound delivery run," he said. "You're taking a P-47 Thunderbolt from Texas to Michigan. Weather's unstable. Expect crosswinds and possible electrical storms over Missouri. Don't push altitude unless you have to." Alice nodded. She didn't ask questions. That was part of the job. Trust orders, trust the aircraft, trust yourself. Nora jogged up beside her, clutching her own envelope. "Where you headed?" "Michigan." Nora sighed. "Florida, again." She nudged Alice's shoulder. "Try not to become a fireball. I'm not ready to lose you, too." Alice forced a grin, but her chest tightened. Losing Marjorie had taught all of them how fragile purpose could be. They suited up in leather jackets that didn't fit right, hand-me-downs from male pilots, goggles hanging loose around necks, parachutes slung over shoulders like oversized backpacks. Mechanics fueled the planes while officers watched like hawks. Engines coughed to life one by one, propellers cutting through humid air. Standing beside her Thunderbolt, Alice rested her palm against the wing. The aircraft felt alive, huge, muscular, built for war, not practice. It was a monster compared to the trainers she had flown. She swallowed, climbed into the cockpit, tightened straps until they bit skin. The engine roared beneath her like a sleeping animal waking up angry. Control tower crackled in her headset. "Pilot Bennett, cleared for takeoff, runway 4. She pushed forward. The plane surged ahead with a force that shoved her ribs back into the seat. Dirt and wind blurred. Wheels left ground. The world dropped beneath her as sky opened like a gate, finally recognizing her. Climbing higher, she looked down at Avenger Field shrinking into a memory. The women below became dots on dust. For the first time, she wasn't training. She was contributing to the war machine itself. Every mile she flew meant one more fighter plane reaching someone who needed it. But war never lets moments of pride last long. Clouds thickened over Missouri. Light rain pattered the canopy. The horizon flickered with distant lightning, jagged and pale. She checked her gauges, fuel steady, oil pressure normal, altitude stable. Until the radio cut out. Static swallowed every frequency, like the sky itself had gone silent. She tapped the headset, adjusted dials, tried emergency lines. Nothing. Flying without radio wasn't new. They trained for it, but not with a storm waiting ahead like an ambush. She considered turning back. Then she thought of Thomas, of Marjorie, of every woman told she was replaceable until she did something no one else could. She pushed forward. Wind slammed the wings, jerking the Thunderbolt sideways. The plane vibrated violently, interior rattling like bones in a tin coffin. Rain turned into bullets of water hammering the glass. Lightning flashed white against the wingtip, too close. She dropped altitude, hoping to slip beneath the storm. Visibility dropped to nearly nothing. Trees blurred below like ghosts. Air currents tossed the aircraft in violent surges, stomach rising to throat. Engine sputtered once, just long enough to make her blood go cold. Then recovered. Then a new sound pierced through the chaos. Metal vibrating wrong. A warning she'd heard before. She checked gauges, oil pressure plummeting. A line had ruptured. The same malfunction mechanics had used for training drills, except this time there was no runway, no instructors, no safety crew waiting. She had minutes before the engine seized. Lightning lit up the landscape. She saw farmland, rivers, roads, no clear landing strip. Trees stretched endlessly. She scanned frantically until she spotted a narrow dirt stretch between wheat fields, just long enough to attempt a landing if she didn't hit the fence at the end. She dropped flaps, heart pounding, breath shallow, rain blurring vision. The plane descended. Wind caught her wing. She corrected too sharply. The thunderbolt hit ground hard, skidding across mud, wheels bouncing, metal shrieking, tail whipping sideways. She fought the controls, muscles burning, jaw clenched, until the plane finally shuddered to a stop, smoke curling from the engine. Silence. Her heartbeat filled the cockpit. She pulled off her goggles slowly, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wasn't dead, but her plane was. Farmers ran from fields, shouting, pointing, shocked to see a woman climbing out of a warplane like she'd fallen from the future. One of them yelled, "Miss, where did you come from?" Alice didn't answer. She just touched the damaged wing and whispered to the machine like it was a soldier. "You got me here. That's enough." Hours later, a military transport truck arrived. Officers inspected the wreckage, faces hard. One approached her. "You should have turned back when comms dropped. That plane was worth $500,000. Alice stood tall. I was more. He stared at her for a long moment and said nothing. That night, back at base, a sealed envelope awaited her cot. A new assignment. Shorter. Riskier. Stamped in blood-red ink. High priority. Coastal transfer. Classified. She traced the seal with her thumb, pulse steady. The war was calling again, and this time she felt it pulling her closer to something bigger than ferry missions, something that would demand everything she had left. 3 days later, Alice found herself standing on a coastline base in North Carolina, wind whipping off the Atlantic in sharp, salty gusts. The air tasted like distance, like the world beyond America's shores was breathing against her skin. The new base felt different from Texas. There were no cheerful cadets, no dusty barracks full of laughter masking fear. Here, the atmosphere was heavy, stern, military to the bone. Uniformed officers moved with purpose, mechanics whispered instead of shouted, and every aircraft on the runway looked like it had scars from places no one dared describe. Alice was escorted to a hangar sealed with guards posted at both entrances. Inside, a single plane waited under floodlights, sleek, polished, painted night black instead of military gray. No insignia, no numbers, nothing to identify it. She felt her throat tighten. "What is this?" she asked. The officer in charge didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a clipboard. "You will fly this aircraft to a naval facility in Maine tomorrow at 0400 hours. Weather forecast is volatile. Enemy U-boats have been spotted off the northeast corridor. Do not fly low over open water. If you encounter enemy fire, divert inland." Alice blinked. U-boats? On a ferry mission? The officer finally met her eyes. "You're not just delivering planes anymore, Bennett. You're positioning assets for European deployment." A pause. "You're entering a corridor the Navy can't always protect." The words landed like distant artillery. They had hinted missions might reach the war. She didn't think it would happen this soon. After signing papers, she walked the length of the aircraft, fingertips gliding along the cold metal. It felt different from any fighter she'd flown. Light enough for speed, heavy enough for fuel, built to travel far. A bridge between continents. Behind her, Boots approached. Alice turned to see an older woman, late 30s, crisp posture, eyes like steel. She wore pilot wings, not trainee badges. "You must be Bennett," she said, voice calm and deadly certain. "My name's Evelyn Hart. I've been ferrying planes since before the men figured out they needed us." Alice shook her hand. Evelyn's grip was firm, grounding. "You have a reputation," Evelyn continued. "Storm landings, cross-state emergency descent. They picked you because you don't panic." Alice tried to hide the flicker of pride. "And why are you here?" "To make sure you don't die tomorrow." They walked together to the edge of the hangar. Outside, the ocean crashed against rocks like an unending drumbeat. Evelyn leaned against the railing, eyes on the dark water. "A lot of girls think flying is about bravery. It's not. It's about clarity. Up there, you have 10 seconds to process what would take someone on the ground 10 minutes. If you think emotionally, you crash. If you fly angry, you die. If you hesitate," she paused, jaw tightening, "someone else pays the price." Alice swallowed. "How many missions have you flown?" "More than I can count," Evelyn's voice dropped. "More than I should have survived." They stood in silence. Wind roared. Waves hissed against stone. Finally, Alice asked what she'd been too afraid to say. "Did any of us make it across the Atlantic? Women, I mean." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Some made it far enough that no one knows where they died." The words hit like cold steel. As they walked back, Evelyn placed a hand on Alice's shoulder. "Whatever's calling you forward, you need to decide if you can carry it without letting it consume you." Alice nodded, unsure whether the fire inside her was strength or a fuse burning down. She barely slept that night. She lay in her bunk listening to the ocean pound the shore, each wave sounding like a heartbeat too loud to ignore. She thought of Thomas, of Marjorie, of the countless unnamed pilots who vanished over open water. At 0350, she suited up. Jacket zipped tight, aviator cap secured, dog tags tucked beneath layers like a secret prayer. She walked onto the runway where floodlights cut through darkness and the sea wind slapped her awake. The black aircraft waited, engine primed, like a shadow with wings. No applause, no documentary crew, just a girl and a war meeting halfway. She climbed into the cockpit, fingers trembling with purpose, not fear. The headset crackled to life. "Pilot Bennett, you are cleared for departure. Maintain radio silence unless compromised. Godspeed." Engine roared, wheels lifted, the coastline fell away. Ocean stretched beneath her like endless darkness. For the first time, America wasn't below her. The world was. She flew into night, unaware that this flight would be recorded unofficially, secretly, quietly, as the moment Alice Bennett stopped being a promising pilot and started becoming a legend. The moon hung low over the Gulf of Mexico, a pale ghost behind drifting clouds as Alice tightened the straps on her parachute. The air was humid, thick with salt, and the roar of engines echoed across the dim runway. Tonight wasn't a routine ferry mission. This one carried a classified experimental radar system destined for a naval base preparing for a potential Japanese submarine incursion along the East Coast. If she failed, an entire convoy could be ambushed. She couldn't shake the tension in her chest. Something felt off from the moment she stepped onto the tarmac. Mechanics whispered in clipped sentences, officers avoided eye contact, and even the dispatch officer, usually chatty, spoke in short, urgent phrases. It wasn't fear she felt. Alice rarely feared death. It was anticipation, the kind that crawls under your skin and refuses to be ignored. As she climbed into the cockpit of the P-38 Lightning, the metallic surface felt colder than usual. She ran her hand across the controls, whispering a quiet prayer. "Keep me steady." The engines growled to life, vibrating through her spine. She pushed the throttle gently, then harder, wheels lifting off the ground as the Florida coastline shrank beneath her. 30 minutes into the flight, clouds rolled in without warning. The sky darkened into an ink-black void. Lightning forked across the horizon, turning the ocean below into broken glass. She switched radio channels, trying to contact control, but all she heard was static, a harsh, endless hiss. She tapped the side panel, adjusted frequencies, tried again. Nothing. Then, the engine sputtered. Just for a second, barely noticeable, but enough to spike her pulse. She glanced at the gauges, oil pressure fluctuating, fuel flow inconsistent. She checked the backup tanks, normal. Then she noticed something chilling. The seal bolts on the line connecting the secondary fuel system were mismatched. Someone had tampered with the aircraft. This wasn't weather. This wasn't mechanical failure. Someone had tried to kill her. Lightning cracked inches from her left wing, blinding her. She yanked the controls, stabilizing, wind buffeting the plane violently. Altitude dropped fast, 10,000, 8,500, 6,200 feet. She forced herself to breathe. She switched to emergency transponder, sending out a blind signal. "Mayday, mechanical failure, possible sabotage, coordinates." Static swallowed her voice. The world outside shook so violently it felt like the sky wanted her dead. The ocean below looked impossibly far, yet terrifyingly close. Then another sound, something she had never heard mid-flight, metal scraping inside the fuselage. A panel behind her trembled, screws rattling loose. She risked a glance over her shoulder and froze. Fuel was spraying into the cabin like mist, atomizing in the air. One spark, just one, and she'd be nothing but a flash of fire in the night. The storm wasn't the danger now. The aircraft itself was a bomb. She killed the main engine to slow combustion risk, gliding through the storm with only the auxiliary turbine whining softly. The cockpit went eerily silent. Her heart thud loud enough to drown the wind. She pulled out her map, eyes adjusting in the darkness. If she glided west, she might reach a civilian strip near Pensacola, but without engines, she'd hit the water before she made it. She scanned the horizon, nothing but black waves. Then, through the clouds, she saw them. Faint searchlights sweeping the sky from a destroyer patrolling the coast. If she could angle low enough, glide close, maybe they'd see her and send rescue boats. But a water landing in this storm meant her chances weren't just slim, they were microscopic. She made the decision no pilot ever wants to make. She unbuckled her harness. Her hand trembled as she reached for the cockpit latch. She whispered to the aircraft, as if speaking to a dying friend. "You got me this far. Thank you." The storm ripped the hatch open, wind slamming her back. She counted to 3, sucked in a breath, and jumped. The cold hit like knives. Wind tore at her body. Lightning flashed above her, turning her silhouette into a falling shadow against a burning sky. And somewhere far below, unseen in the darkness, the ocean waited. Alice Bennett vanished from radar that night. And by dawn, newspapers across 3 states carried the same headline. WASP pilot disappears over Gulf, assumed dead. America mourned a ghost. But Alice wasn't done. Not even close. That was the first thing she felt. Not panic, not pain. Just a cold so brutal it erased every thought except survive. The ocean swallowed her whole, salt water rushing into her nose and mouth as waves crashed over her parachute. For a moment, she didn't know which way was up. The harness wrapped around her legs like a serpent, dragging her deeper. She kicked violently, lungs burning, finally breaking the surface with a gasp that felt like stealing air from God. Thunder rolled across the sky, lightning illuminating massive black waves that tossed her like driftwood. She couldn't see the wreckage, couldn't see land, couldn't see ships, just endless water. Her flight suit absorbed water, weighing her down. She ripped the lower straps open, letting the heavy padding drift away. She reached for her emergency flotation vest and pulled the cord. Nothing. A defective vest. Another coincidence. She cursed under her breath and began treading water manually, muscles shaking from exhaustion. She didn't know how long she drifted, minutes, hours, maybe lifetimes. But the storm slowly weakened, replaced by a haunting silence broken only by the churn of distant waves. Then she saw it. A faint glow on the horizon, orange, flickering. Fires on water. Aircraft debris. The storm had torn her plane apart across miles, and sections of the wreckage now floated like burning tombstones. She paddled toward the nearest flaming fragment, hands trembling as she gripped the jagged metal to stay afloat. Every wave slammed her body against sharp edges, blood mixed with salt water. She stared at her reflection in the flames, wet hair plastered to her face, lips blue, eyes hollow but alive. "Not tonight," she whispered. "You're not taking me tonight." Hours passed. Dawn finally crept across the sky, staining the horizon pink and gold. The storm clouds parted to reveal a broken world of twisted metal and calm, glassy water. Alice's arms were numb, her mind foggy. She drifted in and out of consciousness. Then she heard it. Distant engines. Not planes, boats. She forced her head up, vision blurring. Through the haze, she saw a gray silhouette slicing through the waves, a naval destroyer. Searchlights swept lazily across the water, unaware of the lone figure clinging to a fragment of her own death. Alice mustered the last energy left in her body. She released one hand from the wreckage, raised her arm, and waved weakly, barely lifting it above the water. Her voice cracked as she screamed, "Help!" Her call was swallowed by wind. She tried again, louder. "Over! Over here!" Her vision darkened. The boat began to drift away, engines rumbling, growing smaller. Her fingers slipped from the metal. Her body started sinking. A slow descent into the quiet. But fate had never planned to let her die anonymously. Just before her face dipped beneath the waves, a spotlight snapped directly onto her, blinding white, warm, unmissable. Someone on the ship yelled, sirens blared, engines reversed. A rope ladder splashed into the water beside her. Hands grabbed her shoulders, pulling her upward, out of the ocean, onto steel decking. Voices shouted orders. Medics pressed blankets to her skin. Someone slapped her cheeks to keep her conscious. "She's alive! Oh my God, she's one of the WASP girls! Get her to sickbay, now!" Alice opened her eyes just enough to see a sailor leaning over her, rain dripping from his cap. "You're safe," he said. "We've got you now." She tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. "They tried to kill me." Then everything went black. She slept for 27 hours. When she awoke, America had already printed her obituary. To the world, she was a fallen hero. To the government, she was a loose end who saw too much. And to her enemies, whoever sabotaged that aircraft, she was a ghost who refused to stay dead. When Alice woke, the hospital room smelled of antiseptic, burnt coffee, and a faint trace of engine oil. Bandages wrapped her arms and legs, but it was the sheets of military secrecy that pressed heaviest on her chest. Officers stood silently at the foot of her bed, speaking in clipped sentences, eyes sharp and unreadable. A nurse whispered to her that the Coast Guard had recovered classified components of her P-38 intact, which meant her near-death ordeal had prevented a major intelligence leak. Alice barely reacted. Her mind replayed the jump, the ocean, the fire, the cold. Every detail burned into her memory like a tattoo she could never remove. She wasn't a hero. She was lucky. And luck, she knew, was temporary. Hours later, Evelyn Hart arrived, brisk and composed. She didn't smile, didn't waste words. She simply sat in the chair beside Alice's bed, folded her hands, and said, "You've been cleared for return. Another assignment waits. They're not done with you yet." Alice turned her head slowly, voice hoarse. "After everything?" "Everything is never enough in this war," Evelyn replied. "You survived a storm that would have killed 10 trained pilots. You're not just a ferry pilot anymore. You're a standard. Others will follow in your shadow." Alice's lips pressed into a thin line. She had never wanted to be a standard, just to survive. And yet the fire in her chest, the obsession with proving herself, flared stronger than ever. She looked down at her dog tags and whispered, "For Thomas, for Marjorie, for all of us." 2 days later, she was back on the runway. The new aircraft was a P-51 Mustang, freshly delivered from the factory. Evelyn gave her a concise briefing. Fly a convoy of 3 Mustangs from coastal North Carolina to New Jersey, avoiding enemy radar. The sky was calm, almost serene, but Alice knew serenity never lasted in wartime. As she climbed into the cockpit, mechanics called out last-minute checks. The engines roared to life under her fingers, more familiar now than her own heartbeat. She lifted off with smooth precision, every movement a testament to the months of brutal training and near-death experience. Over the Atlantic, the horizon stretched wide, golden and empty. For the first time since her near-fatal jump, Alice allowed herself to breathe. She led the formation, calling each maneuver, adjusting speed and altitude with near-perfect timing. She thought of every lesson, each emergency landing, each storm, every drop of sweat and salt water. The sky responded to her, the way it always had, like a living entity that understood mastery. A blip appeared on the radar. Enemy aircraft? She didn't know. She pushed the throttle, banks tightening, leading her formation in tight rolls to keep the Mustangs in sync. The tension was unbearable, every second measured, but she didn't panic. She relied on instinct honed through months of training, her previous missions now a part of her muscle memory. By the time they reached New Jersey, the sun had broken through the clouds, turning the water and sky into molten gold. The convoy landed without incident. Officers waited, expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. One scribbled notes furiously, as though recording a new legend. News would spread quietly at first. A young WASP pilot who survived the Gulf storm flew her first real high-risk mission and led a formation with precision rivaling the most seasoned male pilots. They wouldn't announce it widely. She was a ghost in the official record, just as the government preferred. But among the women in training, among the mechanics, and even the men who observed from the sidelines, her name became a whispered benchmark. Alice Bennett. A pilot who didn't just survive, she conquered. That night, she walked alone to the edge of the hangar, staring at the water beyond the runway. The moonlight reflected off the calm waves, a reminder of the ocean that had almost claimed her life. She traced the dog tags at her neck and whispered, "This is just the beginning," because it was. Alice Bennett wasn't just a pilot anymore. She was a symbol. an unspoken standard of courage, precision, and survival. And the war hadn't even begun to test her fully. The months that followed blurred into a whirlwind of missions, storms, and skies that tested every fiber of her being. Alice Bennett became a name whispered with awe at every coastal airfield she touched. New pilots trained under her shadow. Mechanics checked engines twice when they knew she would fly next. And even commanding officers gave a subtle nod whenever she walked past. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was redefining what women could do in the war. One mission in particular cemented her legend. She was tasked with delivering 3 experimental P-51 Mustangs to a forward base near the Atlantic, with a radar system essential for tracking German U-boats. Enemy fighters had been reported, and weather forecasts predicted violent storms along the route. Most pilots would have refused. Alice accepted without hesitation. The flight began at dawn. She led the formation across the glistening Atlantic, wings cutting through morning fog. Every instinct was heightened, watching instruments, scanning skies, gauging winds, monitoring fuel. The storm hit faster than predicted, clouds dark and heavy, lightning splitting the air around her. Radio chatter became static, engines sputtered. The formation wavered under the fierce wind. Alice's mind went back to every near-death experience, the Gulf jump, the sabotaged P-38, the crashed Thunderbolt. Each memory sharpened her senses. She made split-second decisions that kept the entire formation intact. At one point, a Mustang was caught in a downdraft, spinning dangerously. Without hesitation, Alice dove beneath, guiding it out of the storm with precision no manual could teach. Hours later, they landed at the forward base, engines smoking, clothes soaked, bodies exhausted. Officers rushed to her cockpit, unable to hide admiration. One said quietly, almost to himself, "She doesn't just fly planes, she commands the sky." News of the mission was classified, but whispers traveled faster than printed papers. Young women in training saw her as proof survival wasn't enough, excellence was achievable. Men in the service, once skeptical of female pilots, now deferred respectfully, realizing her courage and skill rivaled any fighter in the air. Yet Alice remained humble. Each mission, each success, reminded her of those who didn't survive. Marjorie Tyler, the girls who cracked under pressure, the unnamed pilots lost to storms and sabotage. Every flight was a tribute, a silent acknowledgement of sacrifice. In letters home, she wrote sparingly, carefully. To her parents, "The sky tests me every day. I fail sometimes, I succeed more. But I am alive and I am needed." She never mentioned the missions classified beyond the reach of civilians. She didn't need medals. She needed only to honor those who had flown before and beside her. In letters home, she wrote sparingly, carefully. To her parents, "The sky tests me every day. I fail sometimes, I succeed more. But I am alive and I am needed." She never mentioned the missions classified beyond the reach of civilians. She didn't need medals. She needed only to honor those who had flown before and beside her. By the end of the war, Alice Bennett had flown more missions than most men dared to attempt. She survived storms, sabotage, mechanical failures, and enemy fire. She became the figure younger women looked up to, the living embodiment of bravery and skill, and a quiet warning to anyone who doubted what a determined woman could achieve in the face of war. After the war, when official records finally began to recognize WASP contributions, Alice's name appeared at the top, not because she sought glory, but because history could no longer ignore her. Interviews captured her calm, measured demeanor, but few understood the ferocity it took to survive and lead. She never flaunted medals, she never boasted. Her legacy lived in whispers, letters, and the countless women who followed in her footsteps, touching skies that had once been denied to them. On quiet nights, long after the war, Alice would walk along the same coastline where she had survived the storm. She looked out at the horizon, thinking of Thomas, of Marjorie, of every lost pilot, and every girl who had risked everything. The sky stretched endlessly, and for the first time, she felt peace. Not because the war had ended, but because she had flown, survived, and inspired. Alice Bennett became more than a pilot. She became a legend. A young girl who had dared to defy rules, survive the impossible, and command the skies with skill, courage, and heart. She was remembered not for the recognition she sought, but for the lives she touched, the standards she set, and the barriers she shattered. And somewhere, above every flight path, every cloud, and every storm, her spirit soared forever.